Hi, I'm Amelia. I never thought I'd be telling you my story this way, but here we are. I always thought life had a way of working itself out, that things would fall into place if I just kept doing my part. That was until I got the phone call from my brother. It was just a few days before Christmas, and I was at home trying to relax after a long shift at the clinic. I had my boots off the apartment quiet, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator when my phone buzzed. I didn't expect much, probably just Julian calling to check in like he always does. But when I answered, his voice wasn't the usual cheerful tone I was used to. "Hey, Lena," he said, his words careful, measured. I immediately felt a shift, like something was off. "Marina's coming to Christmas this year," he added. I froze. I knew exactly who he meant, his girlfriend, the one who believed in energy healing and always insisted on making everything feel right. She's really sensitive to, the energy from your job at the clinic. We thought maybe it'd be better if you didn't come this year. Just for this one." I stood there, holding the phone to my ear, feeling the weight of those words. Maybe it'd be better if you didn't come. It was as if everything I had been doing, every effort I'd made for this family, didn't matter at all. Over the years, I had quietly become the one everyone could rely on. It started with small things, the little errands I would run for my parents, the extra shifts at work to cover expenses when they couldn't. It didn't feel like much at first, just part of being the responsible one in the family. But then it grew. I started paying bills for them when they couldn't afford it, sending money to Julian when his freelancing didn't bring in enough, or helping Mom out with her ever-growing list of things to do. I didn't even think twice about it. I just did it thinking I was being a good daughter, a good sister. That's what family was for, right? I had been the calm one, the steady one. I took care of things before they even asked, always stepping in, always fixing problems. No one asked how I was doing or if I needed help. The sacrifices I made didn't feel like sacrifices at first. They felt like acts of love, like things I was supposed to do. I thought if I just kept showing up, kept doing everything, eventually they would see me, would appreciate what I was doing. But the longer I did it, the clearer it became that no one noticed, unless something was wrong. When Julian was struggling to pay his rent, I just wired him money. When the car broke down, I co-signed for a loan. When Dad couldn't find work, I paid his rent without even being asked. And when I needed a simple word of encouragement, when I needed someone to tell me they saw the effort I was putting in, it was always crickets. They never acknowledged how much I was doing. I remember the first time I realized it, my birthday came and went without a word. Not a card, not a call, not even a happy birthday from anyone. That's when it hit me. I had been invisible to them, existing only when something was broken, when someone needed fixing. It wasn't love that they showed me. It was just convenience. I was the helper, the fixer, the one who was always there when they needed something. But when I needed something, when I wanted to feel like I mattered, I was left standing alone, waiting for a sign that they saw me too. I started to resent it, but I never said anything. I thought if I kept giving, if I kept being there, things would change. But nothing ever did. The more I gave, the less I got in return. And when I needed support, when I needed them to step up, for once, they were nowhere to be found. I was the invisible one, always in the background, always keeping everything together, while they went on with their lives, taking everything for granted. It was in those quiet moments late at night, when I was the only one awake, that the truth started to sink in. The truth was that I had been giving so much of myself, but had never really received anything in return. Not gratitude, not love, not even recognition. It was like I was invisible. I had spent years in the shadows of their lives, hoping one day they would see me for who I truly was. But that day never came, and that was when I realized the love I had been offering was never going to be enough. Not if they couldn't see me for who I was. Not if I were only loved for what I could do. It had taken years for me to see it, But now I understood. My worth wasn't tied to my ability to fix things for them. I was worth more than that, but no one had ever told me that. So I kept doing what I always did, giving. It was easier that way, wasn't it? To just keep giving, keep fixing, keep solving their problems. Because if I did that, at least I knew my place. It wasn't until that phone call, when Julian told me I wasn't welcome at Christmas, that everything I had been blind to became painfully clear. I had given everything, and in return, they hadn't even noticed I was missing. The phone felt heavier in my hand than it ever had before. Julian's words kept repeating in my mind, playing over and over like a broken record. Maybe it would be better if you didn't come. I couldn't shake the coldness in his tone, the way he casually dismissed me, as if I were just an afterthought, something easy to push aside. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but nothing came out. My mouth was dry, and all I could do was stand there frozen in place. I had always prided myself on being the one who showed up, the one who was dependable, the one who could be counted on in a crisis. It had been that way for as long as I could remember. I thought this was how family worked, giving, supporting, without needing anything in return. But in that moment, standing in my apartment, I began to question everything I had believed about my place in this family. I had always been the helper, the fixer, the one who quietly sacrificed for the greater good. But what good was it when no one even cared to notice? I stood there staring at the empty space around me, trying to grasp what had just happened. Christmas, a time when families are supposed to come together, had become the moment I was forced to face the reality that I wasn't truly wanted. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it, but it didn't. I was left with nothing but the crushing weight of rejection. It wasn't just about not being invited. It was the realization that I had been invisible all along. I had never been seen for who I was. I had been nothing more than a tool in their lives, useful only when something needed fixing. The tears I had been holding back finally began to fall, but they weren't for what Julian had said. They were for the years of effort, the sacrifices, the emotional toll I had carried on my own, hoping that one day, maybe, I would be seen. I had given everything I had without ever asking for anything in return. And now I saw the truth. It had all been taken for granted. I had been waiting for a love that never truly existed in the form I imagined. I thought that if I kept showing up, if I kept doing enough, they would eventually see me not for the things I did, but for who I was. But that wasn't the case. I sank into the couch, my head spinning as the weight of the realization settled in. I had always believed that if I just kept doing enough, kept giving, it would be enough. But it wasn't. It had never been enough. I had given pieces of myself to this family, hoping for recognition, hoping that they would one day appreciate the person behind the actions. But now, in the cold silence of my apartment, I understood. They had never seen me. They had only seen what I could do for them. This wasn't just about Christmas. This was about years of being the invisible one, the one who always gave but never received. And in that moment, I saw it all so clearly, how much I had sacrificed, how much I had given up, all for a family that would never truly value me. The love I had been offering was never going to be enough. Not if they couldn't see me for who I truly was. I wasn't just excluded from Christmas. I had been excluded from their lives long before that phone call. It had always been this way. I felt a strange sense of clarity wash over me, a mixture of pain and release. For the first time in a long time, I realized that I didn't need to keep proving myself. I had been trying to earn something that was never going to be given. The years of emotional labor, the sacrifices, the countless things I had done without ever being asked, it had all been in vain. And it wasn't my fault. It was theirs for never seeing me, for never appreciating me, for who I truly was. I took a deep breath and wiped my eyes, feeling a strange weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time, I understood that I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their validation. What I needed was to stop giving so much of myself to people who would never appreciate it. I needed to stop waiting for them to notice me and start noticing myself. I woke up the next morning with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. The world outside was covered in a soft layer of snow, but inside my apartment, it felt like everything was suddenly sharp, crisp, and clear. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the stack of bills I had been paying for months, years, really. My hand hovered over the checkbook for a moment, but something inside me stirred something new, something I hadn't felt before, a voice telling me it was time to stop. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had been holding everything together for them, my parents, my brother, believing that if I just kept giving, if I just kept taking on more responsibility, they would see me. They never did. They didn't notice how much it cost me, how much I sacrificed to keep their lives running smoothly. And now, for the first time, I felt the courage to take it all back. I opened my bank account on my laptop, my fingers moving almost mechanically as I began canceling every automatic payment I had set up. The mortgage payments for my parents' house, gone. The monthly transfer to Julian's account locked. The car insurance I had co-signed for Dad terminated. It was simple, really. Too simple. But as the confirmations popped up on my screen, each click felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. The relief was immediate, but it came with a strange emptiness. I had spent so many years wrapped up in these financial commitments in the belief that if I kept doing enough, I would somehow make everything okay. But now, standing in front of my screen, seeing those transactions canceled, I realized how much of myself I had been pouring into these obligations, and how little of it had been reciprocated. I had been trying to fill a hole, but it was never going to be enough, because it wasn't about money, it was about me needing to feel needed. As I leaned back in my chair, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I was free. Not just from the financial burden, but from the years of emotional labor I had done without question. For so long, I had been the one holding everything together, silently bearing the weight of their problems without ever asking for help in return. But now, I was finally choosing myself. I wasn't just stepping away from the payments. I was stepping away from a role I had been forced into, a role I had allowed myself to be defined by. I walked around my apartment looking at the gifts I had wrapped for Christmas. The ones I had thought I would be handing over to my family, hoping to finally get the recognition I had longed for. They now seemed so insignificant, so empty. The real gift was the freedom I had given myself, the realization that I no longer had to be the one who held everything up. I no longer had to be the invisible support system in their lives, the one who was always there to clean up the messes they couldn't fix themselves. It was the first time in a long time I felt my own voice rise within me, strong and clear. I wasn't going to keep trying to prove my worth. I wasn't going to keep sacrificing pieces of myself in the hopes that someone would finally see me for who I was. The truth was, I had been enough all along, and it was time I started treating myself that way. I closed my laptop, standing up from the table. There was still a part of me that felt like I was doing something wrong, that I was being selfish. But the deeper I went into my own feelings, the clearer it became. I was not just breaking free from my family's expectations. I was finally giving myself the space to exist on my own terms, without the weight of their needs always hanging over me. The quiet that settled over me was peaceful, but it wasn't the emptiness I had felt in the past. It was a peacefulness I had never known before, a tranquility that came from stepping into my own life for once and putting myself first. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe without guilt, without the looming weight of someone else's needs. I was choosing to live for myself, and the freedom that came with that decision was more powerful than I had ever imagined. As I looked around my apartment, I realized something else. Something I hadn't fully grasped before. I was no longer afraid of being alone. The loneliness I had once feared had transformed into a quiet strength. I wasn't alone anymore. I was finally with myself. And that was enough. It didn't take long for the silence to become noticeable. At first, it was just a small gap, a subtle change in the way things usually went. The calls I had always received, the quiet exchanges of help and support stopped coming. Julian, who had always expected me to take care of things, found himself in a position he wasn't familiar with. When his rent payment was due, he looked around expecting me to step in, but there was no money coming from me. He was forced to figure it out on his own, and it wasn't as easy as he had imagined. It wasn't just the bills. It was the quiet moments when they needed advice or a quick solution to something that seemed small, but was too overwhelming for them. The phone calls that I used to get at all hours, the ones where they asked me to solve something trivial or to make something right, went unanswered. At first, they didn't think much of it. After all, I was always the one who stepped in. But soon, it became clear that my absence was making things harder than they realized. Julian called me a week later, his voice more strained than I had ever heard it. It wasn't just about money anymore. He was confused, a little lost even. "I don't know why everything feels so off," he said, his words faltering. I could hear Marina in the background, her voice a soft hum, as she tried to offer comfort, but the sound of her voice only made the emptiness in the conversation more apparent. They hadn't noticed how much I had been holding together until the weight of it all started to crack. Marina, who had always been the one to focus on positive energy and emotional alignment, started questioning everything around her too. She began to ask Julian about the things I had been doing, the little things that had slipped under the radar. The groceries I bought for them when they ran low, the phone calls I made to coordinate doctor's appointments for my mom, the way I always made sure they had what they needed without them asking. They both realized, though slowly, that I had been the unseen force in their lives. There were moments when I could feel their guilt even through the phone. Julian tried to apologize, but it came out awkwardly, as if he wasn't quite sure what to say. It wasn't the apology I needed, and I knew it wasn't the apology he wanted to give. He didn't know how to apologize for taking me for granted all these years. How could he? He had never had to think about what I did because I had always done it quietly and without complaint. Now that I wasn't there to do it anymore, the holes were becoming too obvious to ignore. It wasn't until Marina asked him one night, "When was the last time you thanked her for everything she's done?" that the shift began. Julian had no answer. The silence stretched between them heavy with the unspoken truth. I had never asked for thanks, never demanded recognition for the work I did. But now that I was gone, the emptiness I had left behind was finally being felt. I wasn't just the one who held things together. I was the one who made things work. Without me, everything felt like it was falling apart, and they were struggling to pick up the pieces. The following days were filled with a quiet kind of tension. I could feel it in the messages they sent, in the calls that went unanswered until the last minute. They were learning painfully that my role in their lives had been more than just a safety net. It had been the foundation they relied on without ever noticing. Now that the foundation was gone, they were forced to face what was missing. For the first time, I felt seen. Not by words, not by apologies, but by the stark reality they were now facing. The things I had done out of love, out of habit, were now recognized as sacrifices, as pieces of myself I had given away without ever receiving anything back. It wasn't about the financial help, the grocery runs, or the late-night phone calls. It was about the fact that I had been quietly holding their world together. And now that I wasn't, they were starting to understand just how much it had cost me. I didn't hear from Julian or Marina for a while after that, and I didn't reach out either. The silence was different now. It wasn't the quiet of neglect, but of contemplation. They had seen the cost of their actions, and they were starting to realize what they had lost. It was a quiet evening when I made my decision. I sat on the couch, my phone sitting on the coffee table in front of me, the screen still glowing from the last call I had ignored. Julian had tried to reach me again this time with a message that seemed more desperate than usual, asking me to call him back. I stared at the screen, feeling that familiar pull to respond, to ease the tension, to go back to being the person who always fixed everything. But this time, I didn't pick up the phone. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. There was no desire to justify my silence, no urge to make them understand why I had done what I did. It was as if the weight I had been carrying, the need to seek approval from people who never truly saw me, had finally lifted. I had spent so many years chasing their acknowledgement, waiting for them to realize what I had given. But now I understood something deeper. I didn't need their approval to validate my worth. The freedom I felt wasn't just physical, it was emotional. I realized that I had been holding on to them, to their expectations, to the roles they had assigned me, as if my identity depended on fulfilling those needs. But it didn't. I had spent years being the one who always showed up, always helped, always gave, but I had never allowed myself to just be. And now, for the first time in my life, I was choosing to be just me. Without apology, without guilt. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the stillness of the room settle around me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad either. It was simply a sense of acceptance, of knowing that I had done everything I could, and now it was time for me to let go. I wasn't just walking away from them. I was walking towards something better, something healthier for myself. The boundaries I was setting weren't walls meant to keep people out. They were markers of self-respect, a reminder that I could protect my peace. There had been a time when the thought of cutting off my family would have torn me apart. I would have agonized over whether I was doing the right thing, whether I was being too harsh, and whether I would regret it later. But now, I felt a quiet strength in that decision. I had never given myself permission to exist without the weight of others' expectations. And now I was finally doing it. I didn't need to keep explaining my boundaries. I didn't need to apologize for choosing myself. The phone buzzed again, and this time I didn't even flinch. I glanced at it, seeing Julian's name once more, but I didn't feel the familiar rush to respond. I didn't need to answer. In fact, I didn't want to answer. The person who needed to be heard now was me. And for the first time in years, I was listening. I stood up, walked over to the window, and pulled back the curtain, just enough to see the street below. The city was quiet, the lights from passing cars glimmering softly in the dark. I felt at peace. This wasn't a lonely peace, but one that was filled with possibility. I wasn't afraid anymore. I had freed myself from a life of trying to prove my worth, from trying to be someone I wasn't just to fit in. I was free to be exactly who I was, without guilt or regret. And in that freedom, I found something I had been searching for all along myself. The phone buzzed again, and this time I didn't even look. It wasn't my responsibility anymore. I had given enough. I had done enough. And now it was time to live for me.